BLUELOCK Phase 2, the Neo Egoist League, finally came into an end, and now it's time for Phase 3. Mission Start. Bring home the U-20 World Cups. Which means it's time for us to theorize on the starting 11 and their substitutes for said World Cups, especially with us now knowing the top 23 who made the list. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I give you the dream team for Japan's under 20. Starting up straight with the formation, or that's what I would say, because I decided to leave the formation to be revealed as we are choosing the players, and so starting up straight with a goalkeeper. And to be honest, this one is so obvious, it's going to be Gagamaru without any doubt on my mind. I mean, we only have two goalkeepers and one doesn't have the feet to stand on like Gagamaru, and so it's an obvious choice. And speaking of which, since we only have one substitute, it's going to be Jin Fukaku. And by the way, as we've seen in the Ubers game, injuries could happen for the goalkeepers if they jump too recklessly. And I mean, fun fact, due to Gagamaru's insane plays, he might injure himself more than you think. And so I know it might seem redundant, I think Fukaku will have his moment in the World Cups. However, let's move on to the defensive line. For the center backs, on the right we have Oliver motherfrickin' Aiku, who will not only be the most important defender, but also will be the captain of the whole team. Now, to be honest, why I chose Aiku, it should be pretty clear to everyone. He is the best defender we've got in Japan. Not only he is amazing on the ground, he also has an insane ability to lock off the aerial territories. And on top all of that, he also has metavision. And in the Ubers game, we've seen him keeping up with Isigi no issue. In fact, it took two metavision users to unite in order to beat Aiku. And if you could believe it, despite being a talented learner himself, he is actually insane at dueling as well. To be honest, Aiku is just the full package when it comes to being a defender. You would always want to have a player like Aiku on your team, unless of course you have Lorenzo. In any case, however, on his left we have Aryu Jiubei. Now one might think that Aryu's only feat is his jumping ability. However, I think it goes even more than that. Of course, no one dominates the aerial territories like Aiku, not just in Japan, but in the entirety of the U-20 category. In fact, he is only rivaled by Agi in this regard. However, that's not all there is to Aiku. You see, his jumping ability is great, sure, but also his insane reach will be so helpful for the team. We've seen him in the Ubers game how he killed off Kunigami completely. The latter could not even come close to the ball. He either stopped him with his insane reach or by jumping better than him. Which means for teams who have a striker like Kunigami, who is great at dueling and jumping, Aryu will be akin to a death sentence on that team. However, enough about the center backs, let's move to the wings. And carry on the left side, we have Chiguri Hiyoma, who I think his inclusion is just a must at this point. The guy will have a triple duty. First, he will be amazing at being reinforcement for the defense, like we've seen him in the Neo Egoist League, but even before that in the U-20 game. Now I gotta say, in the U-20 game he ended up getting injured and not continuing to play the whole match. However, I doubt this will happen again due to him training under Prince, who increased his physical prowess to its limit. Now this means Chigiri will use his speed to sneak up on a lot of strikers and cut them off in the last moment, like he did with Kaiser Baro in the Neo Egoist League. And actually in tandem with other players with metavision, Chigiri would actually be an amazing asset. However, that's not all. His second duty will be swift counterattacks. With his insane speed, Chigiri will be able to take the ball from one goal to the other really fast, especially if one or two strikers stay up there. However, his third and most important duty would be scoring for himself. We've seen with his golden zone and his ability to force his way through into that zone, Chigiri is probably one of the few players who scored in every game. I mean, if he scored in the Ubers game, because we don't know, he would be one of only 5 players who scored in every game. Baro, Rin, Kaiser, Bachira and him. And that's definitely a huge feat for Chigiri and the reason why I put him on the left and not on the right, so he can score often. Then for his counterpart, the right back wing. Now I've seen a lot of people say Bachira fits here or Hiyori, and I'm like, why? I have better positions for both Bachira and Hiyori, and I feel a speedster would fit perfectly here. And for that reason specifically, I'm choosing Otoya. Now previously when I made my first list, everyone clowned on me for choosing Otoya in this position. However, after his insane performance in the last game of the Neo Egoist League, and him actually being able to score against Prince, everyone now respects Otoya. And for that reason, by the way, I think Otoya will have the triple duty as well. We've seen him in the third selection and in the Manshine City game, he is actually great at defending. Not only that, but also he can sneak up on a lot of players, and so that would be his first duty. His second job actually would be so insane for the team, as I feel Otoya will be able to provide an insane assist to the strikers from the shadows. The enemy team will not see him coming to assist the strikers. And of course, his final task is actually to score for himself, and he has shown the ability to do so effortlessly. And so I really think Otoya is the perfect right back wing. However, with that, we are now moving to the midfield. For the defensive midfielder, it's actually once more very obvious. It's going to be Karasu Tabito. I mean, there isn't really a better choice here. The way he was able to dominate the midfield in the PXG game before even unlocking Metavision and then becoming an insane player after doing so really grants him this spot, and honestly, it's not even close. Like, I don't even think anyone is close to Karasu in this regard. And I didn't even talk about his dueling ability and his ball retention, which are so important for this position. And so honestly, much like how Aiko is a mandatory inclusion, Karasu is also a mandatory inclusion here. Then moving on to the left cam, which will be none other than Yo Hiyori. And in fact, I think Hiyori will be the beating heart of the team. He will be the perfect midfielder that would deliver perfect passes to the three strikers. And to be honest, him and Karasu will do insanely in the midfield. They will dominate it so good, I am honestly starting to feel pity for the other teams. And I could tell you all about Hiyori's weapons, but I feel at this point we all know about him and how great of a midfielder he is, and so I will not be doing that, since it is a no-brainer to include Hiyori in this position specifically, especially after the PXG game and him showing us the ability to pass for any striker he likes. In fact, he goes for the most optimal play, and so he really works with every striker. On his right, however, we've got Bachira Meguru. I mean, for once, Bachira has an amazing passing ability, and so he really works as a midfielder. However, he will also play as another striker, and he will try to score his own goal whenever he can. I mean, after the performance he gave in the Neo Egoist League, and him actually scoring in every game, I think Bachira will be an insane goal scorer as well as an insane midfielder, and so I think he is perfect in this position. However, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we reach the meat of the video. We reach the strikers. Now, usually I start from either left or right. However, this time I'm actually going to start with the real striker. The one, the only, Isegi motherfreaking Yoichi. As you all know, I made a video explaining why Isegi is the best pure striker in all of BLUELOCK, and so putting him here is actually a no-brainer. And I mean, before I used to leave this position for other players, however after that PXG game, I think Isegi is the one deserving of this position specifically, and so he will be taking it. On his left, we have Baro motherfreaking Shoi. Now before and because Hiyori is there, I would have actually chosen Shidou. However, I feel Isegi does what Shidou does, only better, and so I really think we need another playing style. Especially now that Baro works perfectly in a team and has the highest scoring rates in the Neo Egoist League. I mean, 7 goals in 3 games is just unheard of. And I know Rin and Isegi had to share their teams with other strikers, but still. And of course, we can't forget about his insane ability to force a goal, especially when the situation is dire. I mean, due to his unpredictability, that's his specialty. And from all of that, we get a pretty much mandatory inclusion. And this is even before I speak about his Predator eyes, and how he is able to hunt for goals throughout an entire game, making him a constant threat for the other team. Then, and speaking of the Predator eyes, on the right we have Rin Itoshi. I mean, this is a no-brainer as well, because Rin is probably the most dominant striker in the entirety of the U-20 category right now. And to be honest, with Rin there is a small catch. He is a bit volatile and a bit unpredictable for his team, but to be honest, it is still fucking Rin. So he is a mandatory inclusion in any Japanese team. But with his inclusion actually, we are done with the main team. And it's actually looking so menacing, I really feel pity for the other teams on the league. Like seriously, who would stand up to this monstrosity? I mean, I don't see any other team being this strong. However, that's a discussion for another day. For now, let's actually talk about the substitutions. And we will start from the top. For Isegi, as I said, his playing style is very similar to Shidou, and so I think he is the perfect substitution. For Baro, actually I think there are 2 substitutions. If Baro somehow gets injured, I think Jigiri could replace him, and then we have another back left wing. On the other hand, I think a perfect substitution would be Yukimiya Kenyu, with his own Predator eyes and his ability to dribble and get himself into position, as well as him showing the ability to play with other Metavision users. Yukimiya is actually the perfect substitute to Baro. Then on the right, right, as a substitute for Rin, I think much like Chigiri replacing Baro, Bachara could also replace Rin here. And then we have another midfielder next to Hiyori. As for a substitute from the bench, I think there isn't really someone to replace Rin. If I had to choose, it would be Ryo or Kunigami. However, to be honest, we could put Ryo in every position and he would do wonders. As for Kunigami, I think there is a better position for him. And so for right now, I think it could be Kunigami or Ryo for Rin, but I'm not really sure. For Bachara, however, I think the perfect substitute would be Ryo again. As I said, Ryo could fit in a lot of positions and he is so good at it. In fact, the only reason I did not choose him for the starting 11 is actually his mental state. With Nagi being eliminated now, we really do not know what mental state he is in, and so I am on the fence about him. But this does not change how versatile he is and how much he fits as a substitute for both Bachara and Rin. For Hiyori, however, and please do not laugh, I actually have two players, Nanase and Sendo. Sendo specifically showed an insane ability to play with Shidou in the U-20 game and with Baro in the NEL. And so if gods forbid Hiyori gets injured, I think the perfect substitute would be either Nanase or Sendo. Simply because Sendo would play perfectly with Isigi and Baro and Nanase would play perfectly with Rin. I know both do not really hold a candle to Hiyori, but honestly we don't really have that many options. For Karasu, however, I am actually going to put two players. The first is Kunigami and the second is Roichi. I know I am doubling on some players, but I feel some of these are really flexible, especially for the likes of Ryo and Kunigami, and so they could fit in a lot of positions. And as we have seen, Kunigami works perfectly as a defensive midfielder. And of course, I don't really need to tell you anything about Roichi. In any case, however, we jump to the defensive line. For the right back wing and replacing Otoya, we are going to have Zantetsu. With his insane speed, his great physicality and his golden zone, Zantetsu would be the perfect replacement for Otoya, and he would provide such support to Isigi, Rin and Bachara, it's actually going to be insane with him there. However, on the left and replacing Chigiri, I am going to put Kurona. With Isigi being in the middle, Kurona would honestly fit on either side. However, I am actually choosing him on the Hiyori side, because he honestly can play perfectly with him. However, and much like Karasu, Bachara and Rin, I'm not going to have just one substitute. In fact, I am going to have two. The second being Kiora Jin. Now, to be honest, Kiora showed an insane ability to be an insane support for the front line, especially with him being able to position himself perfectly so he can deliver a pass to either Kaiser or Isigi. And I feel he could do the same here. Whoever is losing between the three strikers, Kiora would do wonders supporting that player. But let's move on to the center backs. On the right and replacing Aiko, we have Nico Iki. To be honest, Nico is just the Walmart version of Aiko, and I mean this makes him the perfect substitution for Aiko. I don't think he is even close to him, but I think he is the only one fitting to replace Aiko. Replacing Aryu, however, I actually have two players. The first is actually Ryo, and we've seen him before how insane he is on defense, and the second player is actually going to be Kunigami. With his insane jumping and dueling abilities, Kunigami could do the same thing Aryu could do, and so I think he works also as a perfect substitute for Aryu. However, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are done with the dream team. I am really curious to knowing what do you think, guys, and if you agree or disagree with my picks. However, that's all I've got for you today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, thank you for watching.